Hey, what's up guys? So in this video, we're going to be taking a closer look at the new Valentine V1 Gen2. Now, as you guys know, this detector does not have GPS built in, and for a lot of people, that's kind of a deal breaker because, well, GPS is pretty critical in a radar detector these days. I mean, I personally don't want to run a radar detector without GPS. It's important for a lot of false alert filtering around town, things like low-speed muting, to keep the detector quiet around town, or even GPS lockouts, so it can learn and filter out stationary false alerts like automatic door openers or speed signs. It also adds in things like red light camera alerts or speed camera alerts. And so, yeah, GPS in a detector is pretty important. Now, you can add a lot of these features into the V1 using different accessories or even your phone's GPS in an app, but I know a lot of people are against that, and so I want to maybe talk about this in a little bit more detail. And the reason is, it's actually a pretty incredible package. When you pair it with your phone, you can easily add in all the GPS features, and believe it or not, paired with the phone, a lot of the GPS features actually work better in the V1 than it does in a radar detector that actually has GPS built in. It is a little bit more work to actually get it set up, and so I want to talk about the different options, kind of the different pros and cons, and how all this stuff works. Now, I also want to address maybe some of the common objections to pairing a phone with your radar detector and some of the misconceptions that can happen. Things like how people might say, well, I don't want an app running in the background that's going to drain my phone's battery life. It actually doesn't. It really doesn't have much, if any, impact to your battery life. There's also things like how people say, I don't want to have to start an app every time I get in my car. With the third-party V1 apps, they actually do a great job of just automatically reconnecting in the background, so you don't have to launch the app every time you get in the car. Or another maybe common objection I hear is people saying, hey, I don't want my phone running an app to have that app actually conflict with the other things that I'm using my phone for, maybe streaming music or Google Maps or whatever. And again, that's also not an issue because of the way the apps are designed to work in the background so nicely. And so, again, it's just a really awesome all-around package. And I think if people are maybe a little bit too quick to dismiss it because I don't want to have to run a phone with my radar detector, again, totally understandable. You might be missing out on a pretty awesome package that you might be pretty happy with. And so in this video, again, I just want to go over the different options of running your V1 standalone with different accessories and the different iOS and Android apps, pros and cons of what all is involved here, everything that it adds, as well as some of the things that you may need to consider of reasons why you may not want to do that. So with that said, let's go ahead and just start diving into all the different options here. Now, starting off, the default way to run a V1 is just with the V1 itself. You basically buy the detector, stick it on your windshield, plug it in, and start driving. So this is obviously going to be the simplest and the easiest way to go. It's going to give you great performance. It's going to give you good BSM filtering, but obviously it's going to be lacking in the GPS functionality. So there's no low-speed muting, there's no GPS lockouts, there's no red light camera or speed camera alerts. It's just there to detect radar, right? And that's pretty much it. Now, to help add in some of this GPS functionality, Valentine actually sells an accessory called Savvy. It's a $69 accessory that you plug into your car's OBD2 port, and using that port, it's able to tell your V1 when to mute itself when you're traveling at low speed. So it's effectively a way to give you low-speed muting to keep the detector quieter around town without relying on any sort of GPS functionality. Now, this isn't going to help with any false alerts that you get maybe traveling at higher speed, like let's say on the highway, for example, if you're picking up shopping center false alerts as you're driving past them on the highway. And this isn't going to add any sort of GPS lockout functionality. This can't tell the difference between a known false alert that you pass every single time and a brand new signal that you pass this time. It's just going to blanket mute everything at lower speeds. It does, though, make the hardwiring process easier if you don't want to have the detector plugged into your cigarette lighter and you don't want to mess around with wiring it into your fuse box. You can just plug it into the OBD2 port, and it makes powering your detector more cleanly a lot easier to install. Now, if you don't want to pay the $69 for Savvy and you still want the low-speed muting functionality, Valentine also has their own app called V1 Connection, and it now offers a feature called eSavvy. It's basically going to do the same thing as Savvy with the low-speed muting, but instead of looking at your car's OBD2 port to get the speed that way, it'll just use your phone's GPS, and then when you're traveling at low speed, it'll do the same thing and tell the V1 to mute when you're traveling at low speed. And it's also a nice option because it's totally free. It means you don't have to buy additional accessories like Savvy in order to get the low-speed muting. Plus, it's going to add some additional functionality, things like a frequency display on screen so that you can see the frequency of all the different signals that the V1 is detecting. It's not going to work, though, in situations where you don't have GPS. So let's say you start your car in a parking garage or you've been driving for a while and you enter into a parking garage. If your phone loses GPS, it's not going to be able to do the muting, whereas Physical Savvy is going to be able to continue doing the muting in the parking garage because it's not reliant on GPS. So pros and cons to different setups, but Valentine does have a free option available, V1 connection, that's going to give you the low-speed muting. The app, though, does not offer any sort of GPS lockout functionality, so you can't use the app to teach the V1 where known stationary false alerts are from shopping center door openers or from speed signs on the side of the road. It's just going to add your low-speed muting functionality. It also doesn't add red light camera or speed camera alerts, but those are pretty easy to add just by maybe running Google Maps or Waze, which chances are you're probably going to be running anyway, so for most people it's probably not that big of a deal. Next, moving into my favorite apps to run for the V1, and this is where things get really good. Let's start first by talking about V1 Driver, which is the best app to run for iOS. Now, you can think of V1 Driver as a more sophisticated false alert muter. It just quietly runs in the background on your phone and just helps your V1 stay quiet against any false alerts. It's going to give you things like low-speed muting, like V1 connection, but it has some additional sophistication to do things like maybe when you start your car in a parking garage or you drive into a parking garage and your phone loses GPS, it can continue to tell the V1 to mute even in those situations, which can be pretty helpful. Even more important, V1 Driver is going to add automatic GPS lockouts, and so as you drive around with the app running in the background, it's going to automatically start learning all of your stationary falses around town, and when you pass by them in the future, it'll just tell the V1 to mute every time you pass them. So it's basically going to make the V1 much, much quieter. Plus, the GPS lockouts are much more sophisticated than any of the lockouts built into any radar detector from Uniden, Redenso, Escort, etc. It's basically a much more safe implementation, and it's less likely to accidentally lock out a police officer. The other implementations of lockouts are just going to look at a small frequency range, and they're going to say lock out every signal in this frequency range, and they've got a bunch of different, frequency ranges they're looking at. Block out every single signal in this frequency range in this location. The apps like V1 Driver can say, well, maybe I see 2 signals, I see 4 signals. Last time I drove by here, I only saw 1 signal, but now I'm seeing a new signal in this frequency range. I think I should alert the user because this is different than the last time I passed. So there's more sophistication that's built in that makes it less likely to accidentally lock out a police officer. So long story short, the GPS lockouts are automatic and they're better than what you'll get built into any of the radar detectors. You also, of course, are going to get your frequency display on your phone. If you're running an Apple Watch, they're actually developing the Apple Watch integration, so you can actually see the frequency directly on your wrist. V1 Driver can log all the alerts that you see and put them on a map so that you can review them afterwards. You can have V1 Driver audibly speak the different signals that you see, or maybe the frequency. If you don't want to be looking at your phone or looking at your wrist, you can just have it announce audibly the alert frequencies.
KA band 34.673.
Another fantastic thing is just how well V1 Driver works in the background. You just buy the app, run it, get it connected the first time, and then every single time you get in the car, it's going to automatically pair with the V1. I mean, you can restart your phone, you can upgrade the OS, you can do all these other things with the V1, and then again, every time you get back in the car, as long as the phone is running, it's going to automatically reconnect to the V1 and start adding all of the GPS functionality that you want. There's pretty minimal impact to your battery when it's just sitting in the background not connected. And because it's designed to literally just sit in the background, you can easily still use your phone for Spotify or Google Maps or making phone calls or whatever it is that you need to do while driving. I mean, yeah, V1 Driver just does a great job in the background and just telling your V1 to mute when you get an alert. Another thing that I like is it has an auto dark feature, meaning it can keep the V1's display off like this, which can be especially nice if, let's say, you enter a shopping center and there's tons of false alerts, and so your arrows and lights are blinking like crazy. It can keep the display off, and then only when it sees a news signal, something that it thinks is a legitimate threat, only then will it tell the V1 to light up and visually alert you too. And so it's a way to help visually keep the V1 quiet, which can be especially nice in shopping center where there's a ton of false alerts. Now, as far as maybe some of the downsides of running V1 Driver, obviously you're going to need your phone with you whenever you drive. If you don't take your phone with you, that's not going to work. Or maybe if somebody else is driving your car and they don't have your phone, then your radar detector is not going to have the GPS functionality and it's going to false for them a lot more. You can maybe install V1 Driver on their phone as well, so both of your phones could be working at it, but that is a point to consider. If you want to use any of the audio announcements from V1 Driver, like I have it actually speaking the frequency of the signals whenever I get them.
KA band 34.673.
You may need to do a little bit of work, maybe balancing audio levels between your car stereo or the phone calls or the phone's audio, whether it's outputting audio over Bluetooth wirelessly or maybe through CarPlay. It might take a little bit of work, especially if you're adjusting different volume levels in different areas. It's not necessarily going to be critical for the actual radar detector alert because the V1 itself can still beep, but some of the things like getting the audio announcements, you may have to play with a little bit to make sure that they work properly. Now, speaking of knowing the frequency of the different radar signals that you're seeing, you can have those frequencies actually be displayed on your phone screen, though I normally just have my phone tucked out of the way. I'm not looking at the phone. Another option if you want to maybe see the alerts is V1 Driver is adding Apple Watch integration, and they're actively working on this as I'm shooting this video. That may or may not work depending on which complications you're actually running on your watch at the time, and it's still something that's in active development, but it's something that I'm taking a look at as a possibility. You of course have the audible notifications over your car stereo or maybe through your phone directly, but again you kind of have the different audio volume levels that I talked about just a second ago. And then because the V1 has done such a good job with the open API in the first place, it's why third-party developers are able to add these extra features in these different apps. Squirrel Master on RDF is actually working on his own custom concealed display that can visually add a lot of this information, such as your alert frequency. This is also a project that's now actively in development, and this could be another potential option of a way to actually have a dedicated display on screen to see the frequency if that's something that you want. Now, knowing the exact frequency of every signal isn't something that a lot of people would need. It's something that I find very useful and I feel kind of lost not having it. But if you don't necessarily need it, maybe some of these features with frequency alert stuff won't really even matter to you. At the end of the day, though, it's one of those apps to where you can literally just buy it, it's $10, and you just kind of install it, run it once, and you set it and forget it. And it's just going to kind of magically add GPS functionality to your V1 and do an even better job than what you'll see built into any of the radar detectors. And it's why it's such an awesome thing that I don't necessarily want to see people discount too quickly because it's actually pretty easy to do, and it works quite well. With the app running, you're going to have your low-speed muting, you're going to have your automatic GPS lockouts, you're going to have the core false alert filtering that you're going to want around town. It doesn't add things like red light camera alerts or speed camera alerts. For those, again, you'll still want to rely on another app like Waze or Google Maps, but as far as having the false alert filtering in the V1, V1 Driver does a fantastic job on the iPhone. Now, if you're an Android user, there's a couple options here. V1 Driver is available for Android as well, and just like with iOS, it does a great job of just running in the background on your Android and helping add the additional false alert filtering to your V1. Now that said, there's another app that's available for Android. It's JBV1, and this is my personal favorite app to run on Android. Now, I know a lot of you guys are going to ask about YaVi1, which was kind of like the original Android app for the Valentine 1. It was the first app that added automatic GPS lockouts and stuff to the V1. That was a great app, but unfortunately it's no longer being actively developed anymore, and it doesn't support the V1 Gen2. And so YaVi1, just not an option here with the V1 Gen2. For that, if you want the most complete package for the Valentine 1 on Android, that is going to be with JBV1. JBV1, it's a completely free app that adds an incredible amount of functionality. This can basically turn your Android into a rolling command center. You can have it run in the background just like V1 Driver if you like, but there's an incredible amount of functionality that's available here. You've got your low-speed muting, you've got your automatic GPS lockouts, it's got some additional tools to help you filter out any sort of blind spot falses from Mazdas or GM vehicles or Hondas and Acuras that punch through the V1's K-Verifier or its BSM filter. It's got some additional filtering built in to help mute those alerts specifically. It has an auto dark display option to keep your V1's display turned off unless you're actually seeing a legitimate alert. It can add in the red light camera and speed camera alerts directly into JBV1 itself. It can also display the speed limit of the road that you're on right in the app. Then as you drive around, you can also program it to automatically change your V1 settings depending on where you're driving or what state you're in or what radar guns the officers are using in that area. And so if you cross the border into another state where they're using different radar guns, you can literally tell JBV1 to just automatically change the settings in your V1 for you. If you want the app to run in the background and you don't necessarily want to be looking at it, it does a great job of running in the background and just adding all the additional false alert capabilities to the V1. Plus, if you're running another app in the foreground like Waze or Google Maps, it can actually just put overlays of the different alerts that you're seeing on screen while still showing you Waze or whatever other app that you've been running. This way you're able to still see all the different alerts that the V1 is reporting. If you'd rather have everything just kind of running all in one app, you can also have crowdsourced alerts be displayed directly into JBV1 itself. Now, speaking of automation, you can also tell JBV1 to launch itself when you start your car, and then afterwards launch another app like Waze Waze to run in the foreground so that you're seeing all the alerts, the crowdsourced alerts from Waze directly on your phone, and then any sort of radar alerts will just show up as an overlay from the background, which is pretty nice. JBV1 is now also able to show you the historical data of where police have been over time, not just where they were 20 or 30 minutes ago, but also where they've been over the previous weeks or months. That can be displayed as kind of color-coded heat maps on screen. Plus, as you're driving around and you're seeing your own radar and laser alerts, it can also display your previous alerts on screen as color-coded heat maps so you can see where you've previously seen police officers as you've been driving around. You can see your previous alerts on a map. You can have histograms displayed so you can easily tell which radar guns police officers are using in your area. JBV1 can go out to the internet and it can see when cops are maybe using aircraft, helicopters, or planes overhead to look and do speed enforcement down on the highways. It can give you weather information displayed on screen so you know if you're about to drive into a storm, for example. If you're running a TMG laser jammer, it can integrate directly with your TMG so you have a phone with both your radar and your laser functionality and all the mapping stuff in one centralized location. So it's a pretty incredible app. Plus, if you're not even a Valentine user, you can run JBV1 completely standalone now, so you can get a lot of the functionality now without having to use a V1. Obviously, you're going to be missing some of the functionality that requires a V1, like maybe the radar signals and the frequencies actually displayed on screen, but a lot of the other stuff like the crowdsourced alerts, the weather information, the aircraft information, the speed limits, etc., all that stuff you can still see on the app even without running a V1. It is an incredible app. In my opinion, it's probably the ultimate countermeasure app currently available on the market. Now, JBV1, it's only available for Android, and no, there are no plans to bring it on over to iOS. I know people ask all the time, but John Boy, the developer, it just takes so much time and energy to create the app for Android, he doesn't have the extra time to create it for iOS. So it is only available for Android. Now, what does that mean if, like me, you're an iPhone user and you're like, hey, JBV1 is awesome, I want to run it? Well, you can maybe just switch to Android altogether. I'm personally not interested in doing that, so my option is to actually have a second dedicated phone in the car that I can run just to run JBV1. Now, having a second phone in the car does bring a little bit of extra headache. It means you have an extra phone in the car that you need to keep charged. You got to have an extra phone mount, an extra car charger. When you park, if you don't want the phone to get stolen, that means you have to take the phone out of the car and maybe hide it or whatever, and then put it back in the car, or put it back in the mount every time you get back in the car. So there's extra steps that are involved literally every single time you get in and out of the car. If you're maybe parked for a couple days over a long weekend, maybe your phone battery will die, so then you have to, start recharging the phone and get it going back up again. So there can be a little bit of an extra headache here. It's not going to be the most background set it and forget it option if you're running it as a second dedicated phone. Now, I personally like having the phone right on my dash. In my car, if I'm mounting it low on the dash, the windshield is pretty far away and I can't easily reach it, so I have the phone mount attached to my dash itself. That brings it closer to me within reach, but the mount that I had has actually permanently damaged my dash, which is kind of unfortunate, but that's kind of a thing as far as the mount in my car that I was using. In my Miata, where I used to drive, I could easily have a phone mounted on the lower part of the windshield and reach it just because it was a smaller car. So just a little thing to point out, maybe something that I've experienced. I've also found that JBV1 works best if you have a dedicated Wi-Fi hotspot in your car. You can tether off of your iPhone, but again, that's going to be manual too. You're going to have to literally go into your phone and enable tethering every single time you get in the car if you want the extra internet-based features that JBV1 offers. You can, of course, run JBV1 without an internet connection altogether if you like. You are going to be losing some information like the crowdsourced alerts, the live aircraft information, speed limit or weather information. So all that kind of stuff that it's going to have to go out to the internet to see, you're not going to get that functionality, but a lot of the core features, especially for the V1 integration and communication, all that stuff can be done locally even without an internet connection. One of the nice maybe advantages of using a dedicated phone instead of running JBV1 on your main phone, though, is it helps to maybe separate the audio, and if you want to have JBV1 actually audibly alert in any way.
33.8 ahead. 34.7 ahead.
You're not having to worry about maybe connected to your car over Bluetooth. And what about maybe a conflict if you're talking on the phone at the time or you're trying to stream music, and does it, give you the alerts over your music, or does it try to bring down your music volume and display the alert instead? So you kind of wind up sidestepping any potential conflicts for your car and phone combination if you just have the phone directly output any audio itself. So that can actually be one of the advantages of using a dedicated phone instead of your main primary phone. But I do find that for the cleanest and most seamless experience, it's easiest just to use your dedicated phone that you already have, that you're already taking with you. And so again, JBV1 can just automatically connect in the background. It connects to your V1 and it adds all the filtering features, plus all the extra additional functionality that the app offers. And so yeah, JBV1, it's an amazing app. And so for people who are iPhone users like myself, that might be one of the options if you don't want to switch platforms altogether. You could run a dedicated phone, and that would be kind of some of the pros and cons of how that works. Now, if this all sounds kind of maybe overwhelming with JBV1 and you don't necessarily need all of the crazy extra bells and whistles and features, totally cool. Remember, there's also V1 Driver that's available for both iPhone and Android. It's a much simpler app, and it just adds all the false alert filtering, the low-speed muting, the GPS lockouts, things like that, just quietly and seamlessly in the background, especially if you don't necessarily want to have the app running in the foreground and showing you everything. If you just want the false alert filtering for the V1 Gen 2, yeah, V1 Driver does a great job. And so as you can see, there's a ton of functionality that's available here if you're running the V1 Gen 2 or the Gen 1 even, and you want to add a phone to it. Yes, it is a little bit of extra work. I mean, JBV1 is probably the most complicated app just because there's so many features, and if you want to get all this stuff going, yeah, there's definitely going to be a learning curve. Some of the basic stuff is going to be easier to set up and use, and luckily there's some great resources on the forum that you can check out. I'll link to those in the video description too, just like all the other apps and everything that we talked about here, but it's pretty incredible, all the features that are available. And again, because these apps just do such a good job of just connecting automatically in the background every time you get in your car, it's not a huge hassle. I mean, if you've run other apps like Escort Live, that's kind of a pain. A lot of times it doesn't automatically reconnect in the background, or you have to manually relaunch the app when you get in the car. Like it's very different with V1 Driver and JBV1 compared to some of the other apps that are available. So something to keep in mind if you're coming from maybe another app that's been available for other radar detectors. And so again, with the V1, you have some pretty incredible apps here, and it's pretty easy once you get everything set up and running, and pretty seamless once it's all installed. And again, a lot of these features aren't available in other radar detectors, or even if they are, things like low-speed muting or GPS lockouts, they can be implemented even better in a phone, much more sophisticated and safe than anything built directly into the radar detector itself. So as you can tell, in my opinion, I think it's a great package. Yes, it does mean that it requires you to have your phone, and yes, there is a little bit more setup that's involved to initially get this stuff up and running, but once you do, it's a pretty awesome package. And that's why I wanted to share this video, just because there's so much that's available here, and I just wanted you guys to be fully aware of it, and then maybe make your own decision as far as if you want to add a phone or not. If you're against having a phone paired to your radar detector in the first place, that's totally cool. There's plenty of radar detectors that have GPS built in, and that's obviously more convenient when you can just take the radar detector and stick it on the windshield and it does everything. You don't have to worry about downloading any third-party apps and connecting it to your radar detector and setting it up and making sure you have the phone with you at all times and everything. You can just have the radar detector take care of it for you. That's totally cool too. So there's a lot of different options that are available, and it all just kind of depends on what you're looking for. Yeah, whew. Okay, well, that was a lot. Thanks so much for watching. I know you guys may have some questions, and so down in the video description, I'm also going to link you guys to the V1 Driver section or the JBV1 section on RDF, where there's a ton of great resources information where you can learn more about the apps and maybe get any help with getting the stuff set up and customize the way that you want. So yeah, that's it for now. Thanks so much for watching. Hope you guys enjoyed this, and I'll see you in the next video.